very good afternoon to you and a warm welcome to the Citizens Chat Show here on Civic Space TV, streaming on YouTube. My name is Judith Atim. I'm your host. And if you've just joined us for the very first time, welcome aboard and do subscribe to this channel and also spread a word. But also you could drop us a comment in the comment section. Tell us what you think about the conversation that we are just about to embark on. Today we are discussing the crisis of deficit financing in Uganda, a balance between service delivery and rising public debt. And as you are aware, the power distributor Umeme is expected to exit the Ugandan market by end of March 2025, when its 20-year concession for electricity distribution comes to an end. On the show today, we talk about the dilemma in which Uganda finds itself with this Umeme buyout situation. But also in a broader sense, we look at the broader problem, which is reflected in the topic, the crisis of deficit financing in this country, and how do we strike the balance between service delivery and this rising public debt? Joining me to discuss this are my usual panelists, except one who is joining us today. From my immediate left, Dr. Robert Ojambo, Head of the History Department at Kyambogo University. Always a pleasure to have you on the show, Doctor.
Thank you.
Next to Dr. Ojambo is Ms. Charity Ahimbisibwe, Executive Director, Electoral Laws and Governance Institute. Charity, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Atim. Happy to be here and a good afternoon to all.
Thank you. Next to Charity is Honourable George Odongo Stephen, member of the East African Legislative Assembly. Good afternoon, George.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much.
And last but not least, Mr. Joseph Ochieno, political commentator and UBC Ideologue. Always a pleasure having you on the show, George.
Pleasure.
Pleasure to be. So you have mixed George and Joseph.
They are seated together.
You shouldn't have sat together, I think. Joseph, anyway, you're welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me to reluctantly sit at the extreme end, the seat normally occupied by an NRA colleague and a friend whom I can't find, especially when we are discussing matters national.
He might join us
No,
along the way.
He is very much committed to this show. It's just that
I know he's committed.
he's right now very busy. There is a meeting that is taking place that he couldn't miss.
Good, thank you.
So I'm here in defense.
Well done.
Ladies, gentlemen, welcome to the show. And as we now dive into our discussion, I want to read out bits of a public notice that was issued by Umeme on Wednesday, the 26th of March, and also a message from the Speaker of Parliament a day later regarding the same matter. This was on Thursday, of course, as she received the audit report from the Attorney General into the end of the Umeme concession. So, rather the Auditor General. So I'll start with the Umeme public notice, which has about 10 items, but I'm not going to read the entire thing. So Umeme talks about the end of concession, and it says the 20-year Umeme concession for electricity distribution ended after the 28th of Feb 2025 and is currently in the retransfer transition period. That's up to 31st March. The second thing is termination of rights, in which Umeme said that Umeme's rights to the distribution system, including the right to operate the distribution system under the concession agreements, will only terminate at the end of the retransfer transition period, which shall only occur once the buyout amount is paid by the government of Uganda and received by Umeme. Take note that the deadline for this buyout is also end of this month, 31st of March. The third thing is the buyout amount estimate. Umeme says it submitted an estimated buyout amount of $234 million, which is currently undergoing audit by the government of Uganda through the Office of the Auditor General. The audit process is still ongoing, and we, Umeme, await their report before final reconciliation. Item 4 talks about next steps, and it says, upon receiving the audit report from the government of Uganda, Umeme will review the findings and determine the necessary course of action, if any. Payment deadline, that's item number 6. the buyout amount must be paid within 30 days following the end of the concession term, specifically by 31st March 2025. If the payment is not received by this deadline, penal interest will be applied as stipulated in the concession agreements. And then retransfer of distribution system, that's item 8. In accordance with the concession agreements, the distribution system will only be retransferred to the Uganda Electricity Distribution Company Limited or its nominee upon receipt of the buyout amount by Umeme. So that was Wednesday. And then the day after, on Thursday, the Speaker of Parliament, Anita Mong, while receiving the audit report into the end of Umeme concession from the Auditor General, indicated that Parliament agreed to pass the loan on condition that the amount to be paid to Umeme would be the one audited by the Auditor General. And what did the Auditor General say? He informed Parliament that the 190.988 plus US dollars, which is about 700.218 billion shilling loan from Stanbic Bank, meant for Umeme buyout, was in excess of more than 267.614 billion, because the only amount due to Umeme is $118 million, which translates to 432.677 billion, which again is a figure that I think a few days ago we saw in the newspapers that EALA, the Electricity Regulatory Authority, had actually talked about, which was contested by Umeme at that time. So very quickly, I don't want us to delve so much into figures. As in a conversation we had with George earlier, the thinking is the Umeme situation is just a symptom of a broader problem that we face as a country, which is the crisis of our deficit financing. If we are to talk about, and I'm going to start with you, George, if we're going to talk about deficit financing and so on, how do we, the question always comes about debt sustainability. What is our public debt? What is our foreign debt? And so on. And again, a lot of figures always pop up. But the question to an average person is, how do we attach meaning to the figures that we see? How can an average Ugandan easily make sense out of these numbers? But also, importantly, how do we link this to the service delivery dilemma that we find ourselves facing as a country? Would you like to go first?
Well, yeah. You see, debt is normal. There are not many countries that have been able to have surplus budgets. So most of our countries have deficit budgets. So deficit financing is part and parcel of our budgeting system, which in my view is curable. Yeah, curable long term. It's curable, and it really needs some profound conversation so that we can be able to. We need a pick locker, or what do you call them? A lock picker, not a pick locker, but a lock picker, who is able to just go into there and unlock some potential that we have as a country. Now, so in principle, there is nothing wrong with financing our budgets using borrowing, for as long as there is transparency in the whole process, so that the amounts that we are borrowing is subjected to the full stretch of validation, that there is participation of all the technocrats, the Auditor General, the public, because it has implications. Debt has implications. As of last week, we saw that every Ugandan is indebted to the tune of 2.5 million shillings and still counting. Because if going by the figures today, it means that if we have a debt tracker, by today, that amount has risen, given that we have passed a resolution of Parliament to give government the mandate to borrow more money on behalf of you. So sovereign debt becomes toxic once, number one, contracting of that public debt is not done transparently. Two, when we do not have an audit of the performance of other previous loans. Because, you know, we need to do an audit so that you can see debt performance and say, is it really making sense for us to borrow more? Because we should borrow against our capacity to pay back. Because some of the debts that we are contracting are really very toxic loans. They are very dangerous. In the case of Uganda, I've seen that we have gone into borrowing from Stanbic Bank and I think other domestic sources. But we are also contracting debts from private financial institutions whose interest is very, very high. And remember that the whole global financial architecture is not favorable for developing economies. There is what they call the African premium in borrowing. The African premium is exclusively for Africa because there is the thinking that the risk element is so high. So for African countries, borrowing with the same credit rating globally with other countries in other regions, borrowing the same amount, Africa usually is charged what they call the African premium. And it has been determined that it's always over 2% of the total amount that Africans are borrowing. So that is the case for Uganda as well. So each time we borrow, we are accumulating debt, but we are not indicating that to the country, to the public, that we are generating sufficient revenues to pay back the loans, you know, that we are borrowing. And two, that we are actually achieving the targets for which the loans have been borrowed. So we have cases where loans are borrowed for strategic investments, which is plausible, you know. So if you say I am borrowing a loan to fix the road from Entebbe Road to say Mpigi, and it is 20 kilometers, it's a very strategic road, then my interest would be then that at the end of this loan period, as we are paying back the loan, we also have a road that has been fixed. So there is first of all the overinflation of the figures. That's a different issue. I want first to deal with the effectiveness of the loan before I talk about the efficiency. You know, because there are efficiency issues in our debt contracting, where you find that we are borrowing more money than is required to fix a specific problem. So we end up in debt inefficiency because we are using a lot of money to fix a small something that would have been done at a lower cost. So there are all those broad issues, but you're saying what are the implications? The implications is that we are under the yoke of debt. So even our unborn children are going to grow up, you know, paying back these loans. And these loans are structured in such a way that they reproduce themselves perpetually. But we have entangled ourselves in it. And sometimes I think that we do it deliberately because we have not put in sufficient attention, either as members of parliament or even as technocrats, to people who are vending these loans. And they are making a kill out of it. So the biggest business going on now is actually vending of these loans to governments, particularly in the developing economies. And those guys are making a big kill out of our monies because our appetite, our affinity to this, to debt contracting is very, very high. And yet we do not have sovereign energy. You know, we are still dependent when it comes to energy. We don't have energy sovereignty. We don't have food sovereignty. Okay. Actually, when we're talking about food, we are most times talking about food what? Food security. But we're not talking about food sovereignty, because food sovereignty then means that we are capable of producing our own food, and we own the process of producing that food, and we are food sufficient. We are not, and all these are key drivers of debt, because Africa up until 2023 was still importing up to about 85% of their food. You can imagine, 85% of their food. So we can talk about this until the chicken come back home to roost. But as long as there is indiscipline in the public sector, there is indiscipline in the management of our debt, we are going to recycle these debts, and our young generation will lose. We shall be having a poor education because we can't provide for good schools in our rural areas. We are going to have poor roads, yeah, and yet we are saying that we should be able to, engineer economic development from the grassroots through our PDM and so on and so forth. But if people cannot even access the market, then what are we doing about that? Those are all enablers of our economic growth and development. You know, people are unable to go to good hospitals, you know, to improve on the quality of life of our people so that they are very productive. Because the loans, we have to pay our loans. I don't even know how much percentage of our GDP now goes into payment of loans that we generate on a daily, on a yearly. How much do we generate to pay back? You see, so as long as the revenues that we are generating painfully from a very, very, very narrow tax base is going into loan repayment, then we are under the yoke, and the things that we are dreaming of, good education, good health systems, good infrastructure, and so on and so forth, we are not going to achieve it. That's the impact it has on our ordinary citizens.
Thank you, George. So I just pulled these figures earlier before we came for the show. The Debt Sustainability Analysis Report by the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development for the financial year 2023-2024. And it says that as of June 2024, Uganda's public debt as a percentage of GDP stood at 46.8%, which was a slight decrease from 47.4% in June 2023, with external debt accounting for 26.8% and domestic debt at 20%. So just a very brief background there. Coming to, I think, let me move to you, Charity. Just your quick thoughts when we talk about this crisis of our financial sustainability, but also looking at this Umeme situation that we find ourselves in, this predicament we are in. What comes to your mind? How do we actually mitigate this problem?
So, Umeme is where I want to start, because George has talked about us not having, what would say, control over our energy resources. Countries that have attained a certain level of economic development also have control over their energy resources. That they have invested significantly in things like solar. I saw China. China has panels almost everywhere. Even if hydropower went off, instantly the solar would be in place. They have invested in inverters as well, that not at any one time, they run lifts on buildings that are as tall as 100 floors, 200 floors, even Dubai, same story. But for that to happen, they're in control of their energy levels. In Uganda, I think for the last 3 or 4 days, we've been in a blackout. And even if you called your friend in another town, because now we're trading centers, you say, Chisasi, do you have power? No. Ntinda, do you have power? No. You call your friends across the city and everybody has no power. And you stay from midnight to midday the next day and about 3-4 suburbs have no power, then there is a problem. We cannot say we are exporting power to countries around, and yet us, the local people, cannot enjoy that power. Now imagine we have lifts, we have fridges, we have businesses that are run on this power. What is happening to us, the ordinary people that are keeping on our businesses which rely on power? I could not send emails to my friends across Nairobi. I lost 2 meetings. I was telling them funny things. I was telling them we are in a blackout. The guys were thinking, are you serious? And I have nowhere to charge my phones from. My power bank is also out. And they are thinking, this is happening in Uganda in the 21st century. Now, it points to a very big problem. Once Umeme said they are exiting the market, there was friction between government and Umeme. Umeme is saying, for us, we're not supposed to leave at this time. You are even supposed to pay us first. There's some money you have to pay up front. And then there was witch hunting. They are switching off the power because government is taking over. Then government had to do PR. We also had the PS going on air. And people are saying, me, I have money. I want to buy units, but I cannot buy units. That was funny. How do you have money? You want to buy units, you can't load units. And it has been happening to people in this city. So when government said we are transiting from Umeme to, you're returning the service back to government, what was the broader plan? The minister told us it was to make electricity cheaper for us and more accessible to more homes. We've talked about rural electrification, year in, year out. It's now 40 years. We are talking rural electrification. I can still tell you that if you go to the report of 1996 and compare it with the report of today, 2025, on rural electrification, you will notice that the same percentage of households that accessed power has only gone up by 4%. And I've talked of 1996 to date. Count how many years those are. So it means that we are not really progressing very highly on the things that we say we wanted to invest in, and it's coming from the question of public debt. I feel sorry for ourselves as taxpayers. Why? Because we don't seem to see the canons of good taxation which Adam Smith taught in his classes, you know. Adam Smith said that if you're a taxpayer, you should be able to see that correlation between your tax and the services given to you. They are not there. Look at the roads. We repair a road today, tomorrow it is down. And the cost of repairing that road is very high. You know, I was thinking through this whole thing. Gabon, after what has happened to them, and Burkina Faso, and sending away the French and taking over their minerals, they decided to be in charge of their resources and manage them better for the improvement of their society. For us, we have a crude oil pipeline, okay? Where we said we're going to invest, we're going to make sure Ugandans benefit, and this was supposed to help on this whole question of debt financing for us as well, because we're supposed to have money coming out of crude oil for us to also service our debt. But it is not happening. So the debt is growing. We don't seem to see what is going on. And they're saying the first tranche for that oil pipeline is now out. So you ask me about Umeme. Those are energy issues. And I am saying we are in the 39th year or 40th year of the NRM government. When they came, we had little power. They said we have now diversified. They said we now have Karuma. They said we now have, how many power down? There are about 4 or 5 of them. We still have the source of the Nile Dam. Then we have several others that have come up, but West Nile is still in darkness. And you're still telling me government is taking over and we should celebrate because now Umeme has done so little. Government will achieve much more. My hopes on that one are still very low in terms of energy efficiency and in terms of what we want to do with our energy sector. I think that the government should think of investing better in energy. They have invested, but they should think of investing better renewable energy seems to be one area government has neglected and yet might be the silver bullet. We just went through a season of high sunshine. How much of that would we have harvested not to have run out of power all the 3 nights in which people have been in blackout while Umeme could not supply power?
Thank you. Let me come to you, Dr. Ojambo.
Yeah, you have put 2 topics which are related, but for us to understand each one of them, we need to sort of move parallel lines up to a certain point, then later put them at a tangent. I think the first issue is caused by fiscal planning and fiscal management of a country. You know, in 1986, when NRA government came to Uganda, they were running government like their colleagues they had removed, who had also gotten government through a coup, and therefore they went for some time in that approach in military until we got a constitution in 1995. Now, as the constitution was coming in with this stabilizing the economy, there came the law on privatization, the Act of 1993. I remember that act was being debated when I was in Form 3, and I was very interested because I was worried that they were going to remove government sponsorship at the university, and I was really targeting to go to the university. They introduced privatization at the university in 1994, but that act came with a lot of the divestiture of public enterprise. And there have been a number of them that were culprit and very controversial. 1999 was the UEB, which was broken into a number, disbanded into a number of things where Umeme took one part. So we are talking about Umeme, which was just one out of the 3 of the 1999 electricity something
Energy
act. One of them. Of course, you remember the controversial UCB. Then there was another controversial Uganda-a and many others. Uganda-a was sold at a value equivalent to $2, and so many other things that have happened in this country out of this divestiture policy, which my teacher used to call, instead of privatization, they introduced grabatization. You remember national housing and something limited, where people shared the houses that belonged to the country. They are now individually owned in Bugolobi, in many areas of Uganda. So this country has really gone through a lot of pain. Only that now we are putting eyes on Umeme because it is today's problem, and that is the problem of Ugandans. We look at piecemeal problems. When we finish this, we jump on the other one, and we don't get any solution in any of them. So today we are speaking about Umeme. Indeed, when Umeme was coming on board, the electricity supply in the country was too bad. We had reached a time when you would have electricity for a few hours and not have for very many days. There was rationing of electricity. So one of the solutions was to come up with Umeme, then is ESCOM for the generation side of it. And we must accept that when you are doing analysis, there have been some improvement. Load shedding had been something of the past, although the electricity tariffs still remain highest in the region. We still have one of the highest electricity tariffs. But for a consumer, who wants electricity to run his machines, to light up his house, to do his office work. At least electricity has been there for some time. So if you are talking about the providing of electricity, though at a very expensive rate, with the introduction of this automatic pay system, we had even now eliminated the long lines which we were using to go and pay in different centers for electricity. You'd even go there and fail to pay, and you go back home without electricity. So things were improving to a certain extent. And therefore, one would be blinded to think that the divestiture program was a good thing. Now, let me take you to the concession that you are talking about. That's where the problem started. You know, in Uganda, we normally do things as if we're always dealing with emergency. The privatization of Umeme or electricity in Uganda and coming up with the Umeme as one of the company, then ISCOM, because ISCOM is why the electricity tariffs are very expensive here. It was because of that generation company called ISCOM, which was using one of the most expensive methods in the world. She has talked about the better ways of generating electricity. These ones were burning fuel to produce electricity. They were burning fuel. So you have first to buy petroleum or petroleum products to generate electricity. And of course, UDCL, which was generating using our few places.
UDCL distributes.
But there is
GCL.
yes, there is that one.
Generation. Yes.
So the concession itself was very, very problematic. As a student then who was doing privatization, we got a chance to look at some of these agreements after they had been signed. The one with the Umeme, the one with the Stanbic, which took away. Then you remember the controversial junk helicopters and those deals that were done. Although the other one was not privatization, it was a procurement. One of the issue, you would think that Uganda does not have technocrats, technical people to look at agreements and defend Uganda. For example, everything good was given to Umeme to an extent that if they make a loss, we pay. If they make a loss in their work, we pay. And that's how we went on and on until we even put that clause that when they are going, we have to buy them off, which was also put in the thing.
In the agreement.
In the agreement. And you'd wonder, does Uganda have lawyers? But the issue, when you analyze carefully, it was conflict of interest. There are normally middlemen in Uganda here who normally run these, and some are very close people to government officials, if not their children. And at the end of the day, they sign these things without taking into consideration. If you compare with the Tanzania, for instance, especially during the time of Magufuli, and you look at the people who were representing government in these concessions, in fact, they had made it very difficult for any masquerader to come into Tanzania and do shode business. And one of them is the current governor, Bank of Tanzania. That man was a professor of law at the University of Dar es Salaam and was hired by government in most cases to always scrutinize these agreements. One of the most important one was the one on mining, where he came up with something very good, and Tanzania has one of the best mining policy in the region here. So when the man became the governor, Bank of Tanzania, everybody said tick, and many of them. So they were using technocrats who were put there intentionally to make sure that the deal that comes out of the concessions that are signed between government and private individuals or foreign companies or in enterprises takes care of Tanzania. In their own Swahili word, they say, maslahi ya Tanzania lazima ishughulikiwe. They must make sure that, and for that matter, we have a number of agreements that have issues. It's not only Umeme. If you look at the one of UCB, if you look at the one of Uganda-Balance and many others, it seems as if Makerere University and these other universities have not been training good lawyers, have not been training economists, has not been training policy analysts and many of those people. The answer is no, they have been there, but they are terribly compromised, either by the system or the rush, how rush things are done in a rush, and at the end of the day, we get a bad deal. So that's why we are in this catch-22 of Umeme. And why now this thing connects to the debt issue is that we are going to borrow money from Stanbic Bank to pay for that concession. That's where the problem begins. When I was studying economics in senior 5 as a very novice, really defining economics, they make for us a very good categorization of commercial banks vis-a-vis central bank. And the simplest definition of the central bank is that that is where government, that is the bank of government, the bank which was for government and where government can get money to run its affairs. So out of the central bank, government could only be allowed to borrow from banks that are bigger than the central bank. Now, commercial banks, the other definition again, which is for a simple person who had not started the economics, is for little traders who are transacting small businesses to make sure that they cover the gaps of financing their projects. So commercial banks normally have high interest and the other ones have lower interest, because the other one is the one which regulates the interest rates of the commercial banks. So at the end of the day, when you find now the central bank borrowing from commercial banks, then there is a problem. Now in Uganda, they have not even stopped at commercial banks. They have even gone to borrow from individuals, money lender to be specific. Money lender runs, sometimes their interests are abnormal, but because you only go to a money lender because you are debt trapped. You know, somebody was saying, my senior honorable member was saying that borrowing is not bad. Borrowing is one thing that a normal human being should only go to when he is in trouble.
Yes.
Because it is very easy to get into a debt trap. Because why? For people listening there, borrowing means that you are spending your future. That's what it means by borrowing. Borrowing means that you are spending your future. So you spend 2037 in 2025. And therefore, when you reach 2037, therefore now you have to spend, if you're not careful, as he explained, you can now spend 2070. And the more you move, you enter into what we call a debt trap. Now, when you enter into a debt trap, like Uganda now is in a debt trap, we are in a debt trap. And when you enter into a debt trap, you may be forced. This is simple. We don't want to even speak economics. Let's just speak common business language. You may be forced to go into debt crafting. Now, what is debt crafting? Debt crafting is borrowing from X to pay Y. So you are just a manager of debts. You are not even borrowing to run activity. You are borrowing from Y to pay X. That's where Uganda has reached, Uganda as a country. And that's why we should worry. So at the end of the day, without going into the big jargons of these economists, which Honourable Odongo was giving us, just understand it from that layman understanding. That's where we are. So much so that we do not now borrow to invest, to put in, and I want really to, before I forget, Judith, to congratulate government that, for example, the Entebbe Express was a good borrowing. We borrowed, we put money in the right place. The other day, they were already reporting to us that they have already recouped their money, and they were wondering whether we should continue paying. So that is a good borrow. But just connecting that road, the Entebbe Express is Northern Bypass. which is not even complete as yet. And yet we started paying this, we started paying interest on this loan from European and other debtors 10 years ago. In fact, far from 10 years ago. So I must say that the biggest problem in Uganda is that we run there's what they teach us at the university, political economy. But for us, we remove the word economy and we run economics as if it is politics. That is the biggest problem that we have in Uganda.
Thank you, Doctor. Joseph, let me come to you. But before I do that, I just want to, for the benefit of our listeners, our viewers, especially the younger ones who don't know why we are where we are. You might wonder, why is Umeme exiting? Of course, Cabinet resolved in 2022 that they would not renew these concessions that would be expiring for private players in the industry, including Umeme, ESCOM, and others in the hydro and thermal generation sector. And why was this so? Because of a lot of complaints about high power tariffs, electricity outages, just like Charity was talking about. And so the thinking is, if you get these players off and hand back the management of power in the hands of the government, then you will also have these problems go down and subsequently reduce the cost of electricity to the consumer. So that's partly why this is actually happening. And right now we know that we are going through a wave of the second electricity generation reforms, which are currently being implemented, which is also one of those things where Parliament actually said the renewal of the concessions should not take effect. But also, people are wondering, so now when Umeme exits and we have power in the hands of the government, will the state deliver? You know, there are all these, when you go online, there are all these questions that are coming up. If we're having problems with a private player right now, and we know the challenges or incompetencies that we have with our state actors, how confident are we as consumers and as citizens that actually DCL will deliver? And Joseph, I'll just want to pick your thoughts, not just on what I'm saying, but on regarding the topic we're discussing.
Those Ugandans who are wondering whether or not the state will be able to deliver should assess the state on its merit. So if the state does not deliver, dump the agents of the state. These are political questions. These are governance questions, and I'm just rather concerned that we are now confining these to the economics and mathematics of very arrogant Umeme, and forgetting how we got here. But before I delve into that, I want to just, for the purposes of the viewers, put on record that it's true that this NRA incompetent regime, absolutely economically incompetent, inherited governance from a military regime of Tito Okello that ruled this country for 6 months. Tito Okello, Museveni, and DP together had overthrown a democratically elected government. That democratically elected government had governed this country for 4.5 years, massively with the mandate of the people. The last democratically elected government, elected on a very specific, tested manifesto, delivered absolutely highly between 1981 January and 85. And if you put all the index, particularly economic, social, and every other facet, including security, the elected government scores over and above 80%. That's the government of the political party I'm proud to associate with. NRA came in at power in 1986 as a allegedly excess socialist, leftist regime that believed 100% purely on public ownership. In fact, so much that they claimed the progressive social democratic EPC government was too right-wing for them. How on earth Museveni and his Dar es Salaam and entire economists came to the view that they should give our Uganda Electricity Board and electricity generating capacity to a dubious Umeme company to mint dollars from us? I have no clue. How they gave our Uganda Commercial Bank to another Boer bank, Stanbic, I have no clue. Not only have we lost billions, and in fact, trillions of Uganda shillings, but Ugandans have been treated like mini semi-slaves in their own country. In the last 1 week, 2 weeks actually, to be fair, I have had 3 power outages. And interestingly, Charity thought it was me. Every time power would go off, my meter would go to 0. So initially I thought, but I had some power there. So it happened twice. And my niece, who was soon traveling abroad, said she really, really feels for me. Yeah. And when I took her to the airport and came back and found there was no power again, and we just bought some units, looking forward to buying units at the end of it. Just don't laugh. Just you stay very far away from our end of town, you know.
It's really serious.
We might come to Omo March down your place, my friend, to cook, you know. So,
you should go to West Nile.
It was extraordinary. So then my other niece, with a disclaimer, without prejudice, who works for one of these banks, put in the family forum that, you guys, all of you are supposed to buy as much of this energy thing as possible, because this transfer process is going to be substantially disorganized. So you might really, if you don't, you might be in trouble. And so as of last night, I was wondering, Judith, should I buy so much of this so that this incompetent lot, when power outage happens in the next 24 hours, I lose maybe my 100,000 shillings or not? So the hope is then I may have to buy it for, and I need your help. Should I buy, now I think how about 8 units? Should I buy 20, 30, 40, 50? Or should I just buy enough? The letter from Umeme, the statement, and that's what provoked my emotive introductory remarks, I think is extremely arrogant.
It is.
And it's extremely patronizing. And Comrade Museveni, if you represent me as head of state, your cheek being allowed to be bullied openly as a sovereign nation by a dubious private company. Unless you have an interest in Umeme, Comrade Museveni, you should be more annoyed than I am.
I don't think he has an interest.
I
would be surprised.
So, the hallmark of the entirety of the whole thing is quite clearly suggested that Umeme are there to mint money, and that people on the other side. So if you don't do this by A, B, C, D, it is going to be this. And by 31st, by the way, our annual general meeting is going to take place in May. Meaning, if it's not properly resolved, we can say that, well, subject to confirmation and reference to Article 3A, C-1 of our previous agreements, powers only lies with our AGM at the end of May, so we can't do anything. So while that happens, the interests accumulate.
But that's true about agreements. And he's right. Now, from a very legal perspective.
Fine. But then brings you to what Dr. Ojambo said. Dr. Ojambo, for the record, look at this fantastic panel. By the way, and Judith, I'm not trying to play. Me, I genuinely love this panel. And I genuinely love Uganda. And I genuinely love this television network. And sometimes I actually ask, just imagine that you and I could just, recommend the three, to the cabinet of the Republic of Uganda at some stage. We have fine,
Not
intelligent.
Georgina, at least.
No, he's widely read, and you know what, George?
Yeah.
This morning I had a clip from a friend of mine, actually a friend from near Electoral, which is somewhere in London.
Yeah.
A clip from a young Tanzanian girl, Form 3 student, impressive.
Yes,
I think,
yes.
Who
We've
did that
seen
did
it.
round,
Yes.
about the achievements
Yes,
of
of
President
Samia
Samia.
Solo.
And actually, interestingly, I have been praising Samia, but with reservations to the context. That girl, in a very definitive way, cuts
Outlined.
off a period where it's not propaganda. That between 2004 when you came, as a build-up onto Magufuli, this is what you did together with the figures. That is massively impressive. Merely teased here. So, no, Ugandans.
That kid is super bright.
Yes.
She did well. She did well.
And Madam President, thank you very much for actually calling her and inviting her to take a seat at your presidential seat, which was your fantastic stuff, actually. I think that was quite emotive.
It was.
I spent a bit of a moment for it. So there is hope for this continent. There's hope for TZ. And there's hope, in my opinion, for Uganda. I genuinely, you guys, believe that the problem in this country is leadership and it's political. I think we're not going to do anything until Mr. Museveni retires. This conversation, Judith, is a political conversation in which NRA, the political organization, DP, NUP guys,
NRA is the army.
to bring their fiscal policy discussions, topical, and of course let UPC help lead the conversation, on question of fiscal discipline,
Fantastic.
fiscal policies, budget financing, deficit financing, possibilities of budget that are balanced if at all, and as George referred, by and large, borrowing is not bad, meaning debt. I think in context it was more referring to borrowing rather than debt. Of course, I don't necessarily think many of us want debt, but I think the argument here is whether or not governments will continuously operate functionally balanced budgets. And normally, actually, sometimes budget deficits are deliberate indicators that governments are expanding services. Except that if you will have invested in the previous financial years in areas that generate new money for the economy, you could say that over the next 3 years, our budget deficit may grow to possibly 50 trillion. But we expect that by the beginning of the 4th financial year, which may even be outside this government, because that's how it does. It should not necessarily be political parties, nor should it necessarily be about election cycles. That over a projection of 7 years, we expect that the economy will have grown by ABCD, so accumulation of revenues will, if you like, seal off the deficit. And in which case then a new government that comes maybe next February has got this challenge to say that, look, should we maintain the same level of deficit, or do we expand, or do we reduce by maybe in this case either injecting in more in public services or reducing public services, or perhaps expanding taxation? It's reasonably basic economics. And by the way, you can see my economics is average there. It's not the other, but it's not bad. I definitely believe it's actually far better than Mr. Museveni is. So this is what these things are all about. No, there is politics going on. I'm not surprised that within the last week, I was at a panel, a fairly eminent panel, with good friends from NRM. And during break, you have this kind of conversation, and people are asking, and this, on the other hand, the issue we discussed here before, the question of supplementaries. These dubious black monies going to Sudan. And now we've seen yesterday developments in South Sudan, where Uganda is at the center. So basically, who is who with this money? Umeme should not have been privatized, that's my opinion. Uganda Commercial Bank ought not have been privatized. UPC's position is that we grew and developed this country in the 60s, we grew and developed this country in the 80s, and that there was no need for this privatization thing. And the privatization thing was both an ideological reverse for NRA, but it was a deliberate payback for people who put Mr. Museveni in power. I think going forward, these are things that we need to be able to sit back as a country at a political level, political party level, see what NUP guys have got on the table, see what other political parties have got on the table. In NRS case, just surrender and simply say that we've had enough, we've tried a little bit, has not worked. Let's see new programs coming from new faces and new voices. And that, in my opinion, is the only way in which you're going to resolve this matter.
Thank you. So our producers are telling me we have about 3 minutes to time. And we shall take a break, of course, in the next 3 minutes. But just hearing you, yes, you say your economics is not there, but it's somewhere there. And it certainly makes a lot of sense. It resonates with an average person who is listening. But what you say makes a lot of sense. But that would work in a system where we have transparency and accountability in our public financial management. And again, listening to all of you, that's a big challenge that actually plagues this country. The question is, how do we actually ensure that we have this in place?
I think the point is, and the point I was making, let's more politicize this. George talked quite a lot about it, but from George's perspective, you don't possibly expect him to be much more explicit than that. My point maybe is that it's a matter of leadership. And I think people need to be held to account. The President of the Republic must be held to account. The Attorney General Auditor General must be held to account. The Minister for Finance, sometimes comic, must be held to account. Heads of Parliament, the Leader of Parliament must be held to account. But members of Parliament, I think the political class need to have much more conversation. That you guys, whatever we are doing, we are being reckless with the economy, and we are trying to create economic health for this country, for our children going forward. Now, the people who sort of gathered, people who are grabbing, think they're grabbing and it's okay. Yeah. But they forget that this grabbing, has got an effect, and it's not going to be sustainable, particularly when you broaden that up.
You'll respond, Judge, after the break. Thank you. We'll be back shortly.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media, or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back from the break, and the conversation here is just getting more intense and more interesting. The crisis of deficit financing in Uganda, a balance between service delivery and rising public debt. My name is Judith Atim. Once again, welcome. And thank you for being with us up to this time. I'll give the microphone now to you, George. Before we went to the break, you wanted to respond to Joseph's submission.
No, because you had initially asked and said, okay, now we're in this situation. What
exactly? How do we move forward?
How do we move forward? This country is blessed with some of the best institutions, policies, laws. We have a parliament that passes legislation every week. So we are not short of those institutions and regulations. But those are all abstract. Laws, institutions, policies, regulations are all abstract. They only come to life through people. So the greatest investment should be on people, good quality of people. That's why I keep telling people that fear a pickpocket who uses your own fingers. because such a pickpocket can do anything, anywhere. So what we should be looking at is how do we reclaim that space for good people, so that, you know, we have already policies and that there is compliance. You know, our problem is that there is non-compliance, and I can tell you where it is coming from. Longevity has a very high propensity to expose points of least resistance, and those become entry points for corruption, for illicit financial flows. They become points of entry for money laundering, you know, and all these vices that we are dealing with. And all those have the net effect of making a government inefficient, ineffective, and we go into a cycle of borrowing. Now, let me tell you this. I say this on this floor again, that the Umeme question is something that we should have dealt with at the very time when we are divesting Uganda Electricity Board. I think that is where the problem is. Is it in IT, they say garbage in, garbage out. For as long as there was no diligence in crafting this, what she said initially, that, you know, you have got to look at the agreement, because ours is fidelity to the law. When the lawyer looks at the agreement, he reads it and says, these are the provisions of the law, of the agreement, and you can't run away from it. So the mistakes that we made initially, because we were rushing with the idea of privatizing, and at the time, the IMF was pushing down this structural adjustment down our throats. Some people leveraged on their positions to make sure that they made quick deals.
In fact, for Umeme, it was World Bank and the Wajani government.
You know, remember, all these institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, they are not Pan-African, they are not African institutions.
They have interests.
You know, these were, first of all, institutions that were created even before we became independent Africa. They were built immediately after the World War, and theirs is really to advance the interests of the West. So they want to perpetually have Africa in this situation where we must continue to borrow. The trouble is that we have not woken up and smelled the coffee. So we have become agents of that perpetration, willing agents. So a few people, I've said this on this show before, that if we are not careful, we may be in a state of state capture, where a few individuals sitting there without the knowledge of very well-meaning Ugandans at the very top are sitting out there, and they are looking at all these points of least resistance within our system of government and are driving the process of capturing the state. They influence policy, they will influence the creation of these institutions, they will influence legislation, they are going to influence appropriation, because now they are going to say, okay, Umeme wants, you can see the amount of money that Umeme is asking for against what the Auditor General is saying. It's a huge sum of money. But I will tell you that there are going to be so many people coming out there lobbying members of parliament to pass, so that you can say there is an amendment, okay, to the requirement, to what the Auditor General has proposed, and say this is correct because of ABCD, and they are going to pass a huge sum of money. I am glad that the Speaker of Parliament has said, no, we must stick to what the Auditor General has said. There are so many moving parts in our country, and until we put it together and fix it, we are in trouble. So what is my way forward? My way forward is what in economics they say creative destruction. Creative destruction is an economic theory, actually, which says that you can, reboot an institution by adopting systems, having new tools of work. You use new technology, use a new set of skills. You need good people out there, and we need a complete national ethos that advances the interest of Ugandans. We need to start thinking around that, so that there are very good people out here in government. I can tell you, a government employs some of the most brilliant brains. But a system, a culture is very, very powerful. They say culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can have the best strategy ever, but as long as you have a culture that predisposes such an institution, an organization, to the weaknesses that we are talking about, it collapses. So it should be in our everyday conversation, and we must be able to socialize this kind of anger.
In order to create new cultures
yes,
where these values
yes,
actually thrive.
Exactly. And we must be angry as Ugandans, as stakeholders. We must socialize this anger to go down to the ordinary citizens so that they begin to demand what is rightfully theirs. Otherwise, we are in for a big drubbing. Yes. So this is really my position, that we need to rethink the way we are running this. It's not enough to have goodwill. Goodwill has its place. But I think we need to have deliberate actions, that show that we are working to clean up our systems, and get the bad guys out of it. Just get the bad guys out of it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, George. Charity.
So I have been listening to George, and I think about 2-3 things come to mind. One, when Trump just took presidency, he said America first. Trump has been behaving funny in global speak. But Trump is a business mind. And Trump calculated his business of saying, how do I benefit as America at this point where we are as a country? Because they were losing in terms of innovation. They were losing in terms of STEM. They were losing in terms of the economy. The economy was also doing badly. They had nowhere to sell their cars. He started to think how to reinvent the wheel. One of the things he thought about, and very quickly, was the question of how do I get the money which we've been spending on Ukraine-Russia war, to get back into America? But then how do I get to spoil BRICS? Because BRICS was growing, and BRICS was going to spoil America more. I get the man called Russia, and I make him my close ally, and BRICS begins to get cold feet. It will not take off too fast like ourselves. Unfortunately for him, in the mirror of his work, he also started to destroy the UN. Instead of galvanizing the little he had for him to move forward, he started to break down what he had. Now, fast forward, let me bring Trump, and why was I thinking Trump? If we look at Uganda and our debt, and let me stick with the one of 2023, the 97.1 trillion. If we are thinking we want to pay this debt at this point, and then we go to Parliament and we have a supplementary budget, I'm breaking them down for you to understand we need a madman like Trump at this point. Why would we be giving money to Atiak? Why would we be giving money to Lubowa? And why would we be giving money to Coffee, to Gume's Coffee? Is it going to help with the 97.1 trillion? That is the thinking we should be having in Parliament, on the floor of Parliament, by the majority NRM MPs. But that is not coming through. Because what we should be thinking about is, can we reduce this debt burden? Yes, we have talked of domestic financing vis-a-vis our foreign debt. We have a foreign debt, we have a domestic debt. And when we went into domestic financing, we were thinking, domestic borrowing, we were thinking that when you borrow domestically, the domestic people would put enough pressure on government to allow it to deliver, to return what it has borrowed. That was the thinking, but it's not happening. We are seeing this thing growing and we are watching. So how do we stop it? The stopper will come from the fact that now we know we have an elephant called corruption. And everybody sings corruption. IGG sings corruption. IGG has now told us how much money we spend annually.
Close to what we lose?
We lose.
Close to 10 trillion, 9 point something trillion.
Annually. So that is 10 trillion annually. How do we cut that bad? Because if we can save 10 trillion annually, in 5 years, we'll have saved 50 trillion. Would that help to bring down the 97.1 trillion? Yes, it would. So where do we start? Where do we keep talking about these things as government, as people in these spaces, and this conversation just stops here? What are the policymakers actually doing? Why aren't they bringing these people to book? And then lastly, I may not go to security, but I have seen European Union now moving into coffee. They have put money into coffee. And it's also a loan that has come into coffee. Why is it moving into coffee? These would be the broader questions that we're asking now. And what is that agreement looking like? When we went into crude oil, like I had earlier said, the idea was that we're going to make our own local money to reduce on the debt. So what is that one thing we can do as Uganda, thinking about the 97.1 trillion and reducing of that money? Corruption is one of them. We have oil, which has now the first tranche coming in. Can we utilize that money better? And we see ourselves getting return on investment and we reduce on the debt. Until that happens, we're going to remain in this tangle here that we find ourselves in. I also want us to reflect on the 50% IMF is talking about as the threshold for the spending, for you to think that, oh, I have borrowed too much. We went past that mark about 3 or 4 years ago. And so whenever we talk about the big public debt that we have, our economists start by saying it's not bad to borrow. But for me, I want to agree with Dr. Robert from a very ordinary layman's language. That me in my household, the moment I begin to borrow, it means I've begun to dig my own hole to complete this financial destruction. Because once you begin to borrow, it means everything you're living on is borrowed. At any one time, everything that is borrowed could go. We've seen people who have big palatial homes, and before you know it, the bank has taken it. And the man is now a squatter in either somebody's house or he's looking for a one-bedroom to rent at 60,000, and you're wondering, a man had a palatial house on a hill. And that is the real image Uganda is in right now. That you will borrow until one day you'll wake up and you have no country because you've sold everything. You've sold the airport, you've sold Lake Victoria, you've sold River Nile, you've sold everything. So you'll wake up one day and they say, Ugandans have been deported, maybe to South Sudan or wherever. And that is why now the question of how do we deal with this huge debt burden without talking this good language of it's okay to borrow becomes critical. For me, at this point, every policymaker, everyone sitting in, every technocrat should be paying attention to what one thing can you do in that office to stop the leakage. And if you're stopping the leakage is the reason you're going to be sacked from a job, don't you worry. The second hope I have for this country is the number of intellectuals that are growing. Today, in a conversation we've been in earlier, there are 5,000 lawyers, actually 6,000 lawyers, registered by ULS, Uganda Law Society. The database has 6,000 lawyers. Now, that means these are people who have attained a certain level of education. They understand how governance runs. They understand how systems work. What are they doing to support the running of their own government? Are we only running after money? Are we only running after a profit and quietly thinking it is safe where I am? But when you come out in your BMW and it's raining and the roads are flooding, you will sink with me in that lake, whether you kept in that office as a lawyer and drove your BMW. That is how bad it is. And this is what we need to keep thinking about when it comes to the question of the high public debt.
Thank you, Charity.
Please. I just need to contextualize this thing because I have had Charity and also Dr. Robert there referring to what I initially said, borrowing is not bad. Actually, borrowing is not bad because you have a deficit in your budget. That's the truth. You are confronting a deficit in your budget. So how are you going to fill that deficit? Remember, you have essential services to provide. You need electricity, you need roads, you need education, you need health. So the borrowing element is not bad. What is bad is the indiscipline of management of the monies, because there has got to be value for money that you have borrowed. And the borrowing should be against your capacity to generate, sufficient revenue to pay. So if you are a country with that fiscal discipline that Dr. Ojambo is talking about, and that country with the quality of people that have the public good at heart, you should be able to determine that, okay, we are going to borrow money to buy off Umeme against these fundamentals. One, that we are going to sell power, and this is the amount of money we are going to generate over this number of years. We should be able to pay it off. So there has got to be that analysis before you do the borrowing. That's why I say that our problem is basically that we are not transparent and we do not have a very good framework for debt governance. So that's where the problem is. It is not that I'm saying it's just good to borrow. No, the borrowing must be subjected to the due process, and there has got to be return on investment.
But you don't have that due process. You don't have a good system. You don't have transparency. You don't have accountability, and you know it. So then should you continue to borrow?
Interesting. But also, as you argue, I'm also asking myself, this 97.1 trillion that has accumulated over the years, certainly we borrowed and invested in either infrastructure and so on. And I'm asking, just randomly, how have we benefited from these projects that we've borrowed so heavily for as citizens?
That's why I was saying that public accountability is not there. We have not done an audit of our loan performance, because we need to have a dashboard that shows us that, okay, this is our loan portfolio. Okay, we have loan ABCD for African Development Bank. We have a loan this and that. We have IMF and so on. We have probably issued Euro bonds. You know, we fear to go for Euro bonds. Why? Because we shall default. Because Euro bonds are tied to specific time frames. So if you say we have issued Euro bonds for 5 years, we have contracted public debt, you must pay them. They don't ask you for the 5 years, they don't ask you anything. But the day the 5 years expires like this, they expect that you have paid. The moment you don't pay it, the penalties are very high. So that's why we go for internal borrowing, we go for commercial borrowing, and so on and so forth. So the issue here is, that's why I call it public debt governance, because it's a whole trajectory. When you are contracting, is it in the best interest for the public? Have you gone to the public and identified that this is a key necessity? If it is a strategic investment like Umeme, because you want to have power, you know, you need to be energy sufficient to drive other sectors of the economy. Then sit down and say, okay, we are giving Umeme 20 years, a concession of 20 years. Really? For a private investor? Fine. how much money are we going to generate from Umeme? So that by the time this
Concession
expires, we have enough money that can pay off whatever they have invested, if at all there is. But in fact, by the end of the 20 years, Umeme should be packing without even asking for anything, because you gave them a concession. They have been minting money. So government should be there to say, well, we gave you the 20 years, you've made a lot of money, but show us the infrastructure, because we now need to take it over as a government. Not again, after 20 years of a concession, you are again asking for money from government to give you more. So these are the things that I'm talking about, that we have indiscipline in our public sector, and it is driven largely because we do not build watertight systems. The individuals that are there to make those decisions in the cockpit of decision making are not making the right calls.
And that is leadership.
Thank you. Robert.
Yeah, you see, the whole of these things are neither here nor there, because we are just hypothesizing. You know, hypothesis is very good in economics. And I used to ask my teacher, who used to tell us that every time ceteris paribus, I said, where does that condition exist?
Latino.
Some things remain constant.
They are constant. They are never constant. Things are changing. So please. So I look at Uganda. We are like people who are lost. You know, one time I went to a certain city, and unfortunately in Africa here, and I got lost. And I rotated in the same place until we got a taxi, and he just drove us for a few minutes, and we had reached where we had got lost from. So I learned that when you get lost, you have to go back to where you started the journey from, for you to.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. That's the only solution. Yeah. So if you are looking for a building and you are rotating, you are remembering, but we started from here, go there. So this country needs to understand where the rain started beating us. Where did the rain start beating us? As young people, for sure, many people of my age really associated with Yoweri Museveni. When he came and he was talking about his 10-point program, he's talking about so many other things, and then later he tries to change and say, you know, you need to mix and have a mixed economy. Then from mixed economy, he now went to a private economy. And now, 4 years ago, he's now going back to where he started. You tend to think that, yes, Yoweri Museveni was a good leader for that time. That time of 1986, there was a lot of problems. There was confusion in this place. And therefore, you needed a leader like Yoweri Museveni to try and put things. And for sure, until recently, UPDF has been a disciplined army. Now it is not, because when I was growing up, you could not give an army man maize and he says thank you and starts eating. Now they are just like any other armies of Africa. They are involved in beating people and they don't care. They instead go and defend. Those days, you know, NRA, they would not accept such things. So the rain started beating us, in my view, from where we started Project Museveni. And we abandoned the Project Uganda. You know, I've been telling people about these two projects. There is Project Museveni and Project Uganda. Project Museveni is that at all costs, the President Museveni must be in power. And there are people who support that. I don't blame them. But it is very expensive in my view. It is very, very expensive in my view. So much so that now we don't draw a budget according to what we want to develop in the country. But how will this sell us? And us means NRM stroke Museveni, because the two are the same. NRM is the same as Museveni. So you find, in fact, there is a certain election where they had a slogan, and the problem with the Ugandans, they forget very fast. They were saying M, Museveni, movement, and me. Triple M. I don't know whether you people remember. And it was just recently. And they were running with this slogan around Museveni, movement, and me. And the people were very happy. And the budget was the one running this program. And that's when they came with this Miyoga thing, then which translated into PDM. So if we want to resolve this problem, we have to go back to Project Uganda. And Project Uganda should not look at which type of leader from where, which ethnic group, which political party or what, but who has the best manifesto to run this Project Uganda. These days you hear when some of us say, that's not for us, that man is not for us. We cannot involve him in anything because you are not in that project. They don't care whether you are for Uganda. Now I ask myself, for us, we are for who? Are we for South Sudan or Congo or which one? So we need first to change that Project Uganda because it is very expensive. Look at when they are reading the budget. The other day I was feeling a lot of pain. You know, these days, this year they have not done it, but last year, the last 3 years, they have been calling sector ministries to give the updates of how they have achieved the manifesto. And each ministry would come and show how NRM has done very well, and that NRM is Museveni. That, for us who teach and do this work, useless. So long as you don't put on yellow, nothing. This year they have not done it. I don't know whether they are going to do it because it is almost 3 months to the end of financial year. They have not done it. I don't know why. So for us, what we need to do, for example, right now, and I've seen people on TV saying, look at the road network. It is fantastic. From Kisoro to Nimule, from Kasese to Busia. Let me speak about what I know. Now the road from Busia to Kampala is terrible. The other day I was coming, especially after Jinja. The road is potholed. It is dark. In fact, I reached a time I was driving by guesswork. Just guessing. Say, maybe there is no pothole.
Yeah.
You go. It's a dangerous road from Jinja to Kampala here is a very dangerous road with potholes, very dark. I don't know whether the environment is changing. Mabira is dark. So we should be now saying, if you have a road from Busia to Kampala and the road is just too bad, you take averagely 4 hours if you are a very good driver. If you are not a very good driver, 6 hours. Remember, Busia is the entry to Uganda's wealth. That's where we get the biggest money in our revenue collection, either Busia or Malaba, because they connect just a few kilometers there. Look at that road. Should it continue being the way it is in 2025, and then nothing is being done, the road is very narrow, potholed, with a lot of confusion. So you need people to prioritize. What should we make for Uganda? What she was trying to say. Which road should we be making at this material time? How much time, money do we get, returns do we get out of it? I've just given you the example of Entebbe Express. Entebbe Express is already financed. We don't have a date there. So if we thought about such roads, just look at the debate that has taken place on the Eastern, that express, which was supposed to be constructed to Jinja. The debates that have been there, and a lot of wastage of time. And you say these MPs should continue being paid? No. Number 2, leadership. You know, I normally tell colleagues that when they blame students that they have written bad dissertations, a dissertation looks like it is supervisor. When you read a dissertation, you just see the supervisor. If it's wish-wash, it will be a wish-wash dissertation. If it's good, the dissertation will be good. Every country looks like its leader. That's why he was talking about Trump, and I was fearing, I was saying, oh, now America is just like South Sudan. So a country in most cases will always look like its leader. And I will give you 2 examples in Africa and very poor countries in Africa. Look at Zambia during the time of Sata. this good economist who knew what to do. He was in government for only 3 years and he died. But go and look at the changes that he made in Zambia. Up to date, people are still remembering him. 3 years. He did not need 39 years. Go to Tanzania and look at the period of Magufuli, John Pombe, and how deliberately they got this John Pombe from nowhere. By the way, on the list of people who were to win the candidacy of CCM, he was not there. He was the last person to put in his application, and he was induced by some people because they had seen what he had done as a minister in areas where he had been. And that's why sometimes I like Kikwete. Kikwete was accused during Magufuli, but it is because he tried to pull back and leave Magufuli to do his work. So people started accusing him that he did not like Magufuli. But recently he broke a secret where he said that he was the only person in the room of the high-ranking CCM people who supported Magufuli, and he gave the reasons why he supported him. I'm telling you, I spent time in Tanzania during Magufuli time, and myself, I was getting amazed. Every 2 months, you would go back to Dar es Salaam, it would be a changed place. And you say, this man, what magic does he have? So we go into their policy and their things. By the way, Tanzania, in the last 7 years, has had the lowest debt issue. In the last 7 years. But with a lot of development, they have constructed the standard gauge railway. They have constructed the city of Dar es Salaam now at least it is how many? 6 lane, but they want to go to 8 in most of the places, Mwenge to Morogoro to where. So for me, I think the leader, we need to look at leadership very seriously. This business of just dancing Kadodia around and we get out with any type of leader that comes, is very, very problematic. Number 3, you need very professional people. And I don't know how we are going to return professionalism to Uganda because it has run away. We used to have 2 categories of people who had remained to be very professional: the doctor and the teacher. Now, as I speak, and the journalist, of course, was also professional to a small extent. The journalists, you would see them with a lot of problems, but they would handle things very well. Now, journalists want where there is something to eat. That's where they go. They are now being taken to some places. They move with them as if they are personal assistants with the cameras. Now, that's such a country. Look at the doctors. The doctors have now left. The doctors have left the hospitals. They are now in private clinics. I asked one of them recently, why don't you leave Mulago and concentrate on your clinic there? He said, but man, if I leave Mulago, people come to me because they know I work in Mulago. So Mulago is just for selling himself, but the work he does itself. The teachers, for the first time I saw a teacher abandoning a classroom to go and ride a boda. I said, we are dead. I have been analyzing this science scheme of paying scientists. And I don't know whether the Minister of Education is doing an analysis to see whether it has improved the teaching of science. Wapi, it has worsened the thing. The science teacher now goes to struggle only to be on the payroll, to go and concentrate in a private school. Or if he has not done that, he goes so that he is on the payroll, so that he does an early retirement, get a huge pension, and then go and start working in a private school. So is it working? I don't know. There is a lot of unprofessional things. Now, these things begin from our homes. From our homes. People have been blaming leaders. From our homes. Are we professional in our homes? Are we raising children with the type of morals? Because at home we use mainly morals and etiquettes that produce nationalists that are professionals? No. Because at home we have a lot of pressure. You find everybody is fooling the other. The mother is fooling the father. The children are fooling the father. So when these people later are produced, today I was in a meeting in the morning, and in most of these universities, there is one thing they have thought that is not useful. Students eating food. They think that is a very useless thing. And I was telling them, do you know what type of people we are creating? Young men who have not been eating lunch for the last 3, 4, 5 years at the university. Just imagine that young man when he leaves and gets a job or he gets a position. You will find people. You saw a policeman who was one time pocketing meat. He went to a party and they gave him meat and he picked a few pieces and he was putting in his pocket. That man is not because he wants to eat a lot, but he has grown a habit of scarcity. What he's saying, I am eating meat now, but what about tomorrow in the morning? And so on and so on. So at the end of the day, how do you create professionalism? Professionalism is not taught anywhere. It is something that is learned as we grow. Now, in a country where you see that it is the crafter who succeeds, you cannot be professional anymore. And finally, I think the citizens don't need to only stop by talking and complaining. They need to take responsibility. Like, for example, for the first time I saw citizens in Kawempe North refusing bribe and saying, we don't want your money and we are not going to vote you. And that candidate was small. She was moving with 50,000 notes. And they said, we don't want it. Please take it to other people. We don't want it. But if you are saying that let's eat, then after eating, we shall vote the other one. I have found that theory very wrong. You cannot eat somebody's money, or you cannot fall for somebody's property or something and act contrary unless if you want to die.
Thank you. Joseph, let me come to you. I think we've touched on a lot of issues, including how do we, of course, get our house in order? How do we ensure? George, before I get to Joseph, is there a possibility for us to restructure our debt? Do we have options for that?
Debt restructuring is like Panadol.
It doesn't address.
It's a painkiller. Yeah. It's like saying, let's stop the violence, but you will not end the war. You know, you just stop the violence, and the cycle of doesn't end. So debt restructuring is a strategy, because once you realize that you have accumulated debt, you negotiate with the lender, and then you restructure the payment terms and the schedules and so on and so forth. And sometimes I think that in debt reporting, and why we sometimes escape this red line is because we go and have a conversation with the lender, and then they do the restructuring. So once the restructuring has been accepted, but the restructuring does not necessarily mean that you are now out of debt.
Out of debt.
It actually means that the terms of payment, maybe in terms of time, have given them more, but the interest
still accumulates.
Yes. So
you're postponing the problem.
Yes, yes. So you go and do debt restructuring. By the way, that's why I think the conversation should be debt cancellation. That is where LDCs had reached at a certain point, because the yoke was too much. Okay? But like I said initially, that, you know, the financial architecture, the global financial architecture is not designed for developing economies. Actually, it is designed to make us their clients. Okay? Yeah. So the more the
more indebted
we are, the good business that they have. Germany went for in 1950s. Okay? In 1950, Germany went and they had a 50% debt cancellation. When actually at that point, if you looked at the fundamentals of Germany, they did not qualify for even debt cancellation. But because there was a rethink by America. Initially, America wanted Germany to continue being so poor. They wanted to finish off Germany because they saw Germany as a threat until the emergence of Russia. So the moment Russia emerged, they began to rethink their strategy and said, we better have
with
a
the
devil we know that-
strong Germany that now provides
kind of
buffer.
buffer.
Yes.
They cancelled the debt of Germany. They gave Germany more resources for manufacturing. Germany became a powerhouse in manufacturing. They can't do that for developing economies. No. We are going to continue being clients, especially with the indiscipline that we see in our political class, in our public sector. We will continue recycling our debt.
And the Odongo, you see, when you talk about Germany, because of the pain they went through, they are not so much in this IMF and these other things. In dealing with in their diplomatic dealings. That's why you find that organizations like that do not behave like you said.
I can tell you, we can go into the geopolitics, but
for another day. We would love to explore that for another day. Joseph.
I think actually we should identify a date and have this conversation because it's very important. As soon as we bring in Germany, there is another element, a facet that pushes and brings in Scandinavian countries. Scandinavian countries, by and large, in terms of the global north, possibly the best examples of nation states that lead and survive. Those are the countries with the most quiet leaders. Those are countries with the most radically progressive leaders.
Even Finland.
Those are countries that include social democracy as the ideological base for themselves. And those are countries that ideologically, interestingly, predominantly are fairly high tax nation states. And that will bring me to where I wanted to go into, but I noticed it's a big conversation. But no, this conversation, George, is ideological. This conversation is about politics and leadership. And that's why when I focus on Mr. Museveni, it's very deliberate. And when I focus at that level, it's very deliberate because it's really there that will end. But it's also there where you take it from Museveni, take it to Kyagulanyi, take it to all the other political leaders, then look at us, the fifth estate, the citizenry, and then contextualize the policy in terms of what we as political leaders and political parties are providing to them as voters and electors, with you, the fourth estate, in the middle. This is the absent conversation, and I find it generally very frustrating that the Monitor can, for example, okay, we refer to them, the Monitor New Vision, they come with these very scary headlines. And those headlines are not matters of debate in the news media on the day. No leaders or political parties emerge, and maybe for the purpose of normalcy of nation state, democratic nation states. Some of these headlines should instruct the Minister for Finance to appear on a primetime television to explain. Some of these should require the Permanent Secretary or a minister, relevant minister, to explain to the citizenry. Some of these should actually require a lead academic who is a specialist in those areas to have these conversations, including where we've reached, without us actually being the political classes, where we sort of third generational level as it is. Why? Because at independence, African nations claimed and were claiming ownership. And we're moving ourselves from the yokes of colonialism and neocolonialism and imperialism and these masters. And indeed, at independence, we're saying that possibly never again would our resources be used by others to enrich themselves at our expenses. And so there we, as African peoples, by and large as nation states from Ghana to wherever, come back to Uganda. At independence, Uganda People's Congress, then governing political party, deep with their own positions. What is it? What would we do different? How would we make Lake Victoria work for us? How would we make Owen Falls work for us? How would we make our gold wealth in Karamoja work for us? How would we make our coffee work for us? So these are policy things provided by leadership ideology embedded in political parties and organizations. Now, by and large, these parties and their leaders did exist. From a UPC perspective, you see, one academic, you see And you need to read this. Look at what UPC was providing in 1962 as part of his campaign policies and programs. Look at what DP was providing. Look at what KYS was providing. I'm taking you there because this is an important conversation that political parties at that level must have today, and that we, the citizens, must be subjected to. So we should just not follow Mugisha Mundu because, you know, he's building structures. Yeah, we should not follow Chagolanyi because he's a fantastic musician and just won a by-election. What else? We should just not follow Museveni because he's the only one we've known since I was born. When he came to power, my mother and father were students, and they were just thinking of, having the first kiss. And the guy is still there, and the guy has broken your nation states, and you think that is a plus for a continuation of a regime that has broken your infrastructure. I'll put a context. At independence, we had railways. At independence, we had public buses. At independence, we had public houses. At independence, we had industries. At independence, we had parks. But from independence, these things were improved on progressively, and you can mark them over a 5-year period. You can mark them over a 10-year period. I'll bring you to 1980. I've just looked through the figures. Interestingly, as of 1970, our public debt was $155,000. Granted, by 1980, understandably, I think that hit $1 billion. That's a stretch over a 10-year period, something like that. When you look at 1985, 1.2 billion US to where we are today, there's a question you asked George. We borrow. Fine. What's the evidence? We can say that in 1981, because I know it, this is my party, and I'm waking up Ugandans. In 1980, deliberately simply said, look, Idi Amin had broken our nation state by 10 years. Infrastructure had died, agriculture had died, health had died, education had died. We will borrow, to invest in this. Robert, we even have ever had a minister for rehabilitation.
Yeah.
Meaning a dedicated ministry.
To rehabilitate what?
To rehabilitate, yeah, and budgeted for 1980. But over a 5-year period, we didn't have $1 trillion debt as a result. Systematic government spending, fiscal policy and discipline. That was it. The problem we have today is that we relegated politics, and Charles will conclude that I think Judith look at this. There's a very risky venture.
Just to let you all know, we have 10 minutes to go.
Well, a very risky venture that because we have educated people going to school, we're necessarily any better off. No, that's actually part of the trap of the IMF and World Bank. A British minister, told me when I was taunting them, supporting military dictatorship in Uganda, that, Joseph, let the Ugandan economy grow. Let there be a middle class first, a middle class to grow, and then there's a critical number of middle class.
It's called trickle down economics.
Then you can have a democracy. Do you get it? In fact, that is part of my point in the last 5 years when I sought this leadership. We simply say, where are you young graduates? Where are they? Good enough for you, my running mate. The intellectual class.
Yes.
The guys are just,
on this political agenda together.
Anyways, because we don't have time, there's a question of leadership, question of ideology. Political parties need to engage. I think critically, the population Church is talking about, the fourth estate, we need to break the back of Ugandans thinking, ordinary citizens, to know that every day these decisions are made at Parliament. Every day these monies go through Museveni's home to Atiak and to Pineti. These are our money. And whether or not, in fact, there's economic illiteracy. People generally don't know. I think generally people don't know. Maybe even some of the people watching us don't know that the monies we're talking about are directly their monies. Now you wait. Go down the road where this potholed road in Nigeria, stop and pick somebody's 1,000 Uganda shillings. You will see. The whole mob will come to you. But that road is crooked as it is because somebody has eaten 1 trillion shillings of their public money and they're just clapping. No change. Just think about it.
Thank you. You wanted to.
Well,
You were itching to say something when he was speaking.
I don't know.
See the look on your
You
face.
see, he was talking about ideology.
You know, those are sister parties.
Yeah.
Even married. So.
This is which party?
No,
I wanted clarity.
So, you know, listen, you're talking about ideology. Let me tell you something. President Museveni has waxed lyrical about and has a lot of clarity about what can transform our country. I can tell you conceptually that he is excellent. I fear that my president is, for lack of a better word, is actually right now suffering from an economic cognitive dissonance, because on one hand, he deeply believes, which is correct, and he has articulated it very well, that to drive our economy, to drive this country, we need to go into manufacturing. We need to go into manufacturing. If you read the politics of debt in the whole of Africa, one of the things that actually is keeping us indebted is the over-commoditization of our exports. Moreover, we are at the mercy of the importing countries. They impose a lot of restrictions plus taxes, tariffs. So even the value of the commodities is low. So our revenue generation capacity is very, very low. So the president is very clear on how can we generate more revenue. Is when we manufacture.
We
The trouble is that on why I say he's having really economic cognitive dissonance is that he has clarity on what should be done, and he is let down totally by what is being done. You know, I can tell you that, and that's why initially I said, you see, when institutions, when organizations, when have that longevity, they expose so many points of least resistance, and that become entry points. One of the entry points that people have seen is President Museveni's obsession with manufacturing. So what are they doing? They are coming out with all these manufacturing plants, and they are going to say, oh, we are stuck in the middle. We are almost at takeoff. What we want is a government guarantee. What we want is a blue note from the president. A blue letter from the president. So all this is flying around because the president is very committed to seeing that we have a manufacturing sector.
Presidency propensity to
manufacture. Because he wants to produce value-added goods so that we can generate more revenue. So really, in terms of the ideology, there is clarity on that. The problem is there is a disconnect between the conceptual view of the president on how we should move and the actual practice. So practice and concept are completely different.
So therefore,
you get it?
Leadership.
So there is need for us to build that nexus now and say, if we really have got to take off, let us.
Honourable, you just go and look at this at your private time. Supposing he's using reverse psychology.
The thing about some of the things like reverse psychology, so I need to interest myself. But for now, I believe that the president has clarity on what should be done. The trouble that we are having now, that we must fix as a country, whether it's President Museveni or any other president or any other, is that we must fix our institutions, we must fix the people, we must drive the agenda.
Thank you. I'm going to, Charity, I'll just want to hear from you very quickly, and then very quickly, then we just conclude.
So the question of institutions has been around for a very long time. And I think we have been saying that until the time when we build good institutions, then we have no system in place. And we cannot talk about democracy without the existence of these institutions. And we even broadly talked about, and the National Development Plan, if you look at it, if you look at our policies, actually it all looks good on paper. We've been saying you cannot have democracy without the rule of law. You cannot have democracy without good, free, fair, credible elections. And that's why we shout about elections, 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 and elections. And then we said freedom of speech and the media, and then the respect for human rights. Because you cannot associate, you cannot have freedom of speech in a place where you're being curtailed. Now, all these issues, when you look at them amalgamated, what they are telling us is that we are in a precarious situation as a country. And for me, this whole debt question, and we have kind of tackled it at very different angles. I like what I hear from a very simplistic way of the home and the values, and that's what Mugisha is doing. He's doing inculcating values in leaders and ordinary Ugandans. That's what his party believes in. And I'll tell you a very small story. The other day, my daughter was voting. She's in P2. Her friend is Alicia, and she has grown with Alicia all the time. Every time I go to pick her, she says, "Mommy, my friend is Alicia is here." So Alicia was standing to be a class monitor, and she told me, "I'm going to vote for Alicia." But came another friend of hers who gave them a ruler. All of them gave them rulers the day before the votes. And the next day she went and voted this one who gave them the ruler. So when she came back, I said, "So Alicia has your vote?" She says, "No, I didn't give Alicia. Why? Somebody came and gave me a ruler and said I vote for her. That's the one I voted for." And I said, "That was bad." And she said, "No, she gave me a ruler. Alicia gave me nothing." Now,
That's where it starts.
that is exactly where it is starting. And every home is going through this. Who gave the other child the rulers that she went to distribute? It was the parents. Who gave the sweets to those other children at the It is the parents. So are we gradually thinking about the net effect it will have on us as a society? And that is why I called out to the 6,000 lawyers. That is why I'm calling them out, because in your little space, there must be something that you're doing to change for this big debt that we are suffering. At least bring down a leader as we are going to elect. Take those people out of that office. I've been asking you, please don't bring back that parliament, which is there, because we've done a number of exhibitions on corruption, and that parliament has proved to be corrupt. I have asked for a 90% attrition rate from the citizens of Uganda, and I'm happy that the citizens pay attention to these things. Today, from the Afrobarometer survey, which we have just launched right now, citizens have said they have observed there is increased securitization in elections. They have observed there is increased arbitrary arrests. They have observed there is no access to justice. And in huge percentages, the citizens themselves, because this survey was done across the whole country from January to February. And this is the data. I was so excited that Ugandans know what is a human rights violation. Freedom of speech and expression and assembly is at 72%. They realize that that's a violation of their rights. That means that they know the problem. But now, beyond knowing the problem, how do we find the solution to this big debt? For me, it still remains, because my children, my children's children still have to pay 2.5 million when they get their senses. And that number, that amount is going to grow. Soon it may be 5 million. Where will that money come from? And it's not just mine. So don't you sit there in your sitting room and say it's her children. No, even you who is seated there and you're watching me, it is your debt to pay. And it's a debt for your child to pay, or the child you're yet to produce, even those on cameras. This is a big issue that everybody should be reflecting about. As Ugandans, it is time to, beyond dialogue, begin to curate possible solutions to the problems we have.
Thank you. And just talking about that debt issue, when we talked about, I think George was the first to mention the figure when we started. I did a quick math, and just in this room alone, the 5 of us and our 3 wonderful producers, that's already 20 million shillings in debt.
A lot of money.
Yes, that's a lot of money. Yes, Dr. Rob.
Yeah, I don't have much to say. In fact, today I've had a fantastic show where I've just been listening in to see how people say things. And this is one of my best shows. It was up there. I must say that the problem with Africans, in most cases, they know the solutions to their problems. Only that many people in Africa don't want to take risks.
I'm going to give you 3 minutes.
Yes, they don't want to take risks, and they want to stay in the comfortable position. You hear them saying, "If we change, how sure are you that we are not going back to?" In every economic endeavor, you must take risks, and the risks, if you succeed, there is always a very good profit if you or dividend on the risks. So the first risk we need to take is to try new people. There are so many people who have been trained from 1986 to date. Can't we risk and get somebody or some people who are different from these stories of the bush war, when we're in the bush, Those stories have helped us up to here. Now we need to have different stories. Two, the other thing that we need to do, we know people. Our people know that so and so is a thief, so and so is this. But when they are going to vote, they even tell you, but that is not acceptable. If you know that somebody is not fit for something, the more we should be shouting that that person should not come near a responsibility. Because when you give somebody a responsibility to plan for you, to budget for you, to do all sorts of these things, and then they do it badly when you knew that that's what you expected from them, then you start complaining that the debt burden has now reached 49 trillion. It is going to reach 80 with these same guys. Finally, we need to know what to do. And for me, I was very deliberate when I said that you should only borrow when you must, because borrowing is spending the future. And when you spend the future, it means that when you reach that future, you have to spend again another future. So at the end of the day, we must borrow if we must. How come our parents, some of us who come from rural areas, they have not left us debts? My mother, my father did not leave any debt for us, but here we are. We can run in a small way, but run on time and get what we can be able to get, than being deceived that people are borrowing because they want to build this, build the other, when there is almost nothing. So for me, I will not even need to summarize. I summarize by saying that everybody is an economist in his own ways. And how you become economists, you all buy something or you sell something.
Thank
So
you.
you cannot sell what you don't have, and you cannot buy what you cannot afford.
Thank you, Robert. That's your conclusion already, right?
Yeah.
Charity.
My conclusion is now it's time to vote. Make good of your vote. Your right to vote is your right to choose the correct leader. Listen to the manifesto, listen to the message, but also let it resonate with reducing debt, with cutting out corruption from Uganda's system, and improving institutions and promoting professionalism.
Thank you, Charity. Honourable George Odongo.
Olarotunu, once when he was being, Dr. Olarotunu,
Yes.
when he was being interviewed, and the journalist asked him whether he intends to marry soon at his age. And Dr. Larotunu answered, said, for him, hope flows eternal. Those were his words, that hope flows eternal. And it was a very powerful statement, because it kind of inspires, and you're seeing the world from a positive side, in spite of the extraordinary circumstances that we find ourselves. And indeed, for me, as a conclusion, we are facing extraordinary circumstances, and it needs extraordinary solutions, and those can only be generated by us. The research that was conducted recently, and I was reading through it recently, say that all over the world, people don't vote in leaders, they vote them out. A big percentage of people are motivated to go to the ballot, either to validate a leader or to vote that leader out. And I want to recalibrate it and think that we should be looking at both ends so that, you know, you have a balance sheet and say, well, I'm voting out this one, but I also don't want to replace this with the same.
Or worse.
Or worse. So we as leaders
Get
have
rid of them,
it in our hands to determine the quality of leaders that we'd wish to have. And there is an opportunity for you to do that every 5 years. In January next year, we shall have that opportunity. And because of the rising public debt, we need to have to ask the hard questions so that we together can have leadership that will protect the interest of our country. And collectively, we have a responsibility to do that.
Thank you, George. Joseph?
I come from Nagongera. Nagongera is 20 kilometers from Toro town, that is westward. I don't have electricity at home, I use solar. But rural electrification was a UPC program. Minister of Power, Posts and Telecommunications under Obode II, lean and effective government, Mr. Akena Pojok, was the minister concerned. I'm told in 3.5 years, 1984, Akena told me this in London, Dr. Obote repudiated him. So Dr. Obote was not satisfied with the pace of the process of rural electrification. The program started by the new government 3 years early. Today, I don't have electricity in Manyakuny of Nagongera. There is no electricity in Opalpat, the neighboring village. There's no electricity in Sesera. There's no electricity in Chalomba. I was also being told there's no electricity in Mikera, another village that I thought was. But surrounding Nagongera, Nagongera is a very eminent place. Nagongera is definitely much more important and popular nationally than Rwakitura, except for Mr. Museveni's name. When I contextualize, since NRA came to power, Nagongera Road is amongst the worst roads in the country. Since NRA came to power, Toro as a district has got no complete new road. Toro is the region of 39 districts. And when I look through now all the way to Kisoko, to my home, there is not a single new emergent infrastructure, and therefore nothing new that NRA has done between Nagongera and Toro, my home, in the last 40 years. And so therefore I ask, where has all the money that has been grabbed and stolen in my name gone to? I think, as my colleagues say, we need to revisit this matter of date very urgently. We also need to revisit the question of Umeme, and we hope the transformation, when the transfer goes on very successful, particularly because of the rain mess of the other day, the environmental mess of Kampala, shows that it's very urgent that we go through this transition very well, because rural electrification is extremely important because of climate change. It's common sense, but it's something that's going to require leadership. Unfortunately, it's not going to be provided by NRA, it's going to be provided by a new government. Why? Because, like George said, we urgently need to do creative economic destruction. In other words, a radical new alternative, almost certainly a revolutionary new a perspective to nation building, but one that will require leadership, but one which will require national reconciliation, but one which is also require a sense of sovereignty. The burden that NRA is going to leave us as a country is very huge. It's going to need predominantly sober women and generally sober men, and not many who go on X with any kind of influence.
Thank you very much to you all, Mr. Joseph Ochieno, Honourable George Odongo, Ms. Charity Ahimbisibwe Kalebo, and you, Dr. Robert Ojambo. My name is Judith Atim, and this brings us to the end of this edition of the Citizens Chat Show. We've been talking about the crisis of deficit financing in Uganda and how to strike a balance between service delivery and rising public debt, of course, also looking at the broader leadership and governance challenges that plague this country. And of course, we've situated the impending buyout of Umeme in this conversation, and which is actually set to cost us hundreds of billions of shillings, you know, and that buyout is just a few days from now. That's about Monday. This is a chat show. Thank you very much for being a part of our conversation. And please just share your thoughts in the comment section. Drop us a comment there, tell us what you think, and be part of this discussion. Thank you very much. The chat show returns next week, same time. Until then, bye.